Good morning and welcome to CRC's webinar on OPR's Adaptation and Resiliency Program, Adaptation Clearinghouse. This webinar is organized by the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative, or CRC, in partnership with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, OPR. My name is Grace Kaufman. I am a project associate at the Local Government Commission, serving as staff for CRC, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. A quick overview of today's agenda. Meg Arnold, CRC's chair, was planning to provide a brief overview of CRC, but she's unable to attend today, so I will provide that brief overview for you all, for those who may not be familiar with us. Then Annie Carroll from OPR will provide an overview of ICARP and the Adaptation Clearinghouse, and after, Jen Phillips, also from OPR, will provide a brief overview of California's 4th and 5th climate assessments. Before we get started, I have a few logistical items to go over. Everyone will be muted except for our panelists. And due to the large number of participants, we ask that you type your questions into the question box. Please feel free to submit your questions at any point during the webinar. I will summarize those questions during the Q&A portion, which will follow Jen's presentation. If we don't get to all the questions, we'll ask our presenters to respond after the webinar, and we will share their responses in a follow-up email. This webinar will also be recorded and made available on CRC's website along with the PowerPoint presentation. As I mentioned, this webinar is being organized by the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative. CRC is a collaborative of local leaders seeking to build climate resilience through California's capital region. We bring together stakeholders from across sectors and jurisdictions to find regional solutions to address our shared challenges: drought, extreme heat, extreme weather events, wildfires, floods, and more. Our goal is to help the 6 counties of El Dorado, Placer, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba, and the communities they encompass, thrive in the face of a changing climate. And the Local Government Commission serves as the program administrator for CRC. If you have any questions about joining CRC, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Now on to our featured presentations, and there is CRC's membership and our current initiatives. Annie Carroll is the Assistant Planner and Resilience Coordinator for the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. In her role at OPR, Annie manages the Adaptation Clearinghouse, provides technical support to the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program, ICARP, Technical Advisory Council, TAC, and serves as the Governor's Office liaison to the Civic Spark program. Prior to joining OPR, Annie was the Executive Capital Fellow focusing on issues related to the census and pension liabilities. Annie graduated from Scripps College in Claremont, California in May 2016. Our next presenter, Jen Phillips, joined the Governor's Office of Planning and Research in November as a Senior Scientist on Climate Adaptation and Mitigation. Previously, she was with California Ocean Protection Council, OPC, and led OPC's work on climate impacts on the ocean and coast. In this role, she worked closely with partners across California with the other West Coast states through the regional planning body, West Coast Ocean Partnership, and Pacific Coast Collaborative, and internationally. And a quick reminder to all participants to please type your questions into the control panel at any point during the presentation. Now, on to our presenter.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie Carroll. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you so much for CRC and LGC for putting this all together. I want to start by apologizing for the last webinar that was canceled. That was entirely on us. There was an IT issue in the governor's office, and I apologize for that, but it's all fixed now. So thank you for joining us and for your flexibility. Just a quick overview of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. We're the state's long-range planning entity. OPR creates the general plan guidelines. We assist in local and regional planning and review CEQA documents. But also, per SB 246, OPR houses the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, which is also called ICARP. There are 2 components to ICARP. There is the Technical Advisory Council and the Adaptation Clearinghouse. The second component, the Adaptation Clearinghouse, is what we're going to be discussing today. Just as a background about the Clearinghouse is the centralized database for all adaptation efforts and resources in the state of California. And it launched in August of last year. Great, so just to go over some guidelines for resources that are in the Clearinghouse. Given staff capacity and our role at OPR, we focus on a specific type of resource for the Clearinghouse. One, they must be relevant to California. So everything that is on the Clearinghouse mentions or is relevant to California. We have a couple of exceptions for some resources that don't mention California. For example, the field of climate adaptation resilience financing is new. So we chose to include some relevant resources that address climate adaptation resilience financing, even if they don't explicitly call out California. But for the most part, they're all relevant to California. And two, they must focus on adapting and being resilient to climate change. We favor an integrated approach, so we do include resources that address climate mitigation, but only insofar as they also address adaptation and resilience. The third sort of requirement for all of our resources on the Clearinghouse is that we do not host original content. So all of our resources are published elsewhere. We merely aggregate them, curate them, and amplify them to a broader audience. There is one exception to this. We do create case studies. So all of the case studies that you see on the Clearinghouse were created by OPR in partnership with the subjects of the case studies themselves. And anyone can submit a case study or ask to be the subject of a case study. And we love getting those requests. So if you would like to have a case study written about you, or if you have a suggestion for a great case study, please let us know. And we will get that process started. It's basically just a 1.5 page template, pretty easy to write out, but very helpful. So next, I think we're going to go to a demo of the Clearinghouse. Okay, great. So, thank you. So we are now at the landing page of the Clearinghouse. As you can see, there are 5 main entry points up here to enter the Clearinghouse. We'll get back to those in a minute, but if you look down here, you can see featured resources like general plan guidelines, latest editions, and most viewed resources. Search right here allows you to access the full database of the Clearinghouse. So if you look here, you can see all of the climate impacts, the resource types, topics, and public agencies that were responsible for creating the resources that you see in the Clearinghouse. What makes this different from a normal just Google search is that all of these resources address adaptation and resilience. And they have descriptions that point you to the most relevant information in that resource. So right now it seems appropriate to look at the Sacramento Valley. You can filter by county, by region, by statewide resources. Right now we'll do region, and we're gonna try for the Sacramento Valley region up here. And as you can see, there are about 36 results that pertain specifically to the Sacramento Valley region. If we wanted to get a little bit more specific though, and let's say we just wanted to look at resources that related to things that are really pertinent in our region. So flooding, this is another fun quirk of the Clearinghouse since we just launched in August. Occasionally the map will go down to the bottom. Sorry about that. That's life in IT, and as you all know, we're not always up on our IT at OPR. So let's look at, if we looked at flooding and temperature and resource types. Let's say we wanted to do an assessment. We're trying to be compliant with SB 379, and the first step in that is creating an assessment. And so we want to see what other jurisdictions in our area have done to make assessments. and we want to look at some specific topics that are maybe just relevant to agriculture. If we filter for all of those, we'll get we have two resources left. So the first one is the vulnerability and adaptation to climate change in California agriculture. I guess that's the second one, but this assessment comes from the California Energy Commission, or CEC. CEC developed a spatially explicit agriculture vulnerability index for the entire state, derived from 22 climate, crop, land use, and socioeconomic variables. They used urban growth projections for 2050 to examine the possible impacts on statewide agriculture production, land use patterns, and soils. They also, interestingly, used two on-farm case studies out of agricultural practices that link to adaptation and mitigation in our area. So there is the Fetzer Bonterra Vineyards, which uses vineyard carbon storage, and the Dixon Ridge Farms in Winters, California, which produces renewable energy from crop residues. Many of their findings apply to Yolo County specifically, but all of California more broadly. And then the Yolo County case study consists of an econometric econometric analysis of crop acreages under future climate change projections, a hydrologic model of Cache Creek watersheds that stimulates the impact of future climate and crop acreage projections on local water supplies, and a lot of other just really great, useful information. So I would definitely recommend looking at both of those. So I would dig into those at some point. But if we want to keep going here through the Clearinghouse, let's look at topics. So all of these topics are aligned with Safeguarding California, which is sort of the state's best practices adaptation guide. And so all of the icons here, if they look familiar to you, that is why. However, there are a couple of additions that we have here that aren't in the original Safeguarding California. So for example, plan alignment, investing in adaptation, and those are both new. Oh, and equity are all sort of unique to the Clearinghouse. But if you wanted to look at a specific one, for example, public health, it would include a diagram of, in this case, exposure pathways of climate change. And then all county, down here you can see featured resources, and then all of the county climate change and health profile reports for every county in the state of California, which is pretty cool. If we were going to look specifically at, again, the Sacramento Valley, then we would see some that are related to wildfire, extreme heat, drought, and temperature. They not only have specific climate projections, but they also have a pretty comprehensive list of social vulnerabilities in each area. So I would definitely recommend looking at those. Another great topic page to look at is investing in adaptation. We have the OPR Financing Framework Report, which was approved by the AgCarp TAC. And then down here we have state funding opportunities. This is not a one-stop shop for all state grant programs or even all state grant programs related to adaptation, but we wanted to sort of curate a list of current programs that could support adaptation outcomes. If we come over here to tools and data, this would include datasets, visualization tools, etc. We used Lifting the Fog as a model for our work, but with an eye towards a little bit more of a technical local audience. This is addressing relevant data and science. We have a dynamic sortable table down here that highlights only publicly available California-specific data and tools. And for the Sacramento Valley region, I would like to point out the Urban Heat Island Index tool, which was created by Cal EPA. Let's see, I'm just trying to get down to it. There it is, great. This was created by Cal EPA to address extreme heat. So the UHI quantifies the extent and severity of urban heat islands for individual cities. And you can download this or any of the other tools we have here right to your computer, which is fantastic. If we wanted to look at case studies over here, these are examples of innovative planning at the local, regional, and state level. And the idea behind the case studies is sort of to support peer-to-peer learning and to highlight the value of linking state and local policy to the programmatic efforts of individual jurisdictions and practitioners. They're all organized by solution here. So for example, we have investing in adaptation or developing plans and strategies. And then you can see a bunch of case studies that might be relevant to you. If you don't want to look by solution, you just want to be able to see all of the case studies, again, you can look at down here, and that'll give you just the entire database of all of the case studies that we have. At the end here, we have climate stories, which are great. They aim to share just positive examples of individual action taken on climate adaptation resilience. We don't have time to get into that today, but I would recommend checking it out. And for more information about the Clearinghouse and about the ICARP program, I would recommend looking here at about and background. And then if you just want to learn more about how the database works and how to use the site itself, I would just navigate to how to use. What I'd like to point out to everyone is that at the bottom here of every page, we have a suggest a resource button. So you can use that to suggest a resource. You can use that to have any critiques about the Clearinghouse itself, ways that we can improve. We are still really new. This is a very new database, and I know that there are a lot of ways that we can improve. So we'd like to have all of your feedback and any sort of suggestions that you have. So that lives on there. You can go there anytime. And that is it for the demo. Fantastic. Yeah, that's just the main page there. But if you come to, if you take a quick look at the types of resources that we have on the Clearinghouse and where they're located geographically, these are all of the types of resources that we have along the left here. And then along the top, we have all of the regions. So if we come to Sacramento Valley region, there are 36 resources in the Sacramento Valley region, which is more than any other region. Except the Bay Area region, but that's really promising. We can always use more, and we know that there are definitely more plans and strategies and guidance documents and absolutely more case studies. So if you think that there should be more, and if you have ideas for more, please let us know. This is just a close-up on the way the regions are sort of organized for the Clearinghouse. You can see that Sacramento Valley there is the purple one. If you or anyone in your region, again, have published anything or know of anybody who's published anything that you think could be a good resource for the Clearinghouse, please let us know. Even if you don't know whether or not it's a good fit, it would just be fantastic to hear what kind of resources you use. And just pivoting over to SB 379. SB 379 requires every local government in California to incorporate climate into the safety element of their general plan or by reference in other plans. If you or any other jurisdiction around you is working on SB 379 compliance, please reach out to us. We would love to hear about your work, challenges you're running into, etc. If you have any innovative sort of ways of meeting the legislation, that would be fantastic. We want to hear about it. There's also going to be a SurveyMonkey at the end of the presentation where we would love to hear about your strategies and comply with legislation, but you can email us anytime. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jen. Jen, are you on the line?
So much for that overview. Hopefully you all can hear me, but Annie, let me know if there's any technical difficulties at any point during this. I'm just going to spend a couple minutes talking about the climate assessments for California. So as I'm sure you all know, the California Fourth Climate Assessment was rolled out last year at the California Adaptation Forum. We've done obviously 4 of these, and this one was really unique in that it did a series of regional reports. So there's the Sacramento Valley Regional Report, which is extremely effective and really, really well done. I was just looking at it a little bit this morning, and that was led a lot by a team of scientists at UC Davis and other collaborators. So the fourth assessment is a series of regional reports. It also did a series of topical reports, a report on ocean and coastal communities, a tribal report, and a climate justice report. And the fourth assessment also sort of took all of the core technical reports, which were there were 44 of them, these 9 regional reports, these topical reports, and aggregated it into a statewide summary report and a couple more pithy and short brochures to kind of get a snapshot about what the fourth assessment says and what the findings are for climate impacts in California. All of this information is easily accessible on our climate assessment website for California. But I would encourage you, if you haven't already, dig into the Sacramento Valley topical or regional report, because it is a really, really nice synopsis of what is happening in our region and what we're expected to see over the coming decades. All of these reports were extensively peer-reviewed and vetted, and I just want to take a second to acknowledge the many people that contributed to the California Fourth Climate Assessment and put in hours far beyond their day jobs to make this a really robust and thorough effort. So on the heels of that, next slide, please, Annie. On the heels of that, we are already thinking about the fifth assessment for California because this is a multi-year effort. Sorry. This is a multi-year effort where, sorry, I'm getting another phone call, where we really need to kind of get the scenarios and make sure they're being fed into these technical reports and then kind of scaled up to what is happening at a regional and local level. So we're trying to think about kind of what worked really, really well on the fourth assessment and how did that sort of evolve from the first, second, and third assessment, and what can we do with the fifth assessment to take it even further and make sure it's a really robust process and it's also really responsive to the questions on the ground that we're all thinking about, or the questions that are sort of inhibiting or prohibiting swift action on climate. So we're kind of starting from the beginning of, you know, not only thinking about the scenarios and the technical side of the assessment that needs to be generated, but also how do we talk to different communities and players across the state about the questions that this next assessment needs to address. So we're just starting to scope this, and I just wanted to take a couple seconds here on this webinar today to kind of tee up that this conversation is just getting going and sort of introduce you and our team as points of contact going forward if you do have thoughts about topics that need to be addressed in the fifth California climate change assessment, or kind of lessons learned from the fourth assessment, or things you would like to see done differently. So kind of this outreach and engagement piece of the fifth assessment will be a really critical piece, starting early and then continuing throughout the fifth assessment. And of course, we did learn from the fourth assessment that the regional reports and topical reports are a really effective way of kind of aggregating all of this information and making it more easily shareable. So I will pause there, but again, I just want you all to feel free to reach out to us if you have thoughts or questions or feedback. I work very closely with a team of people at the California Energy Commission, Strategic Growth Council, California Natural Resources Agency on kind of thinking about what this assessment should look like. And I'm happy also to answer any questions or hear thoughts at this stage. So thank you. And Colin Bailey, thank you for the soccer shout out.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Annie and Jen, for joining us today. And thank you for everyone who was able to participate in this webinar. We are going to move on to Q&A right now. So our first is, what is the process for submitting resources? And does OPR proactively look and search for new resources to add? So what is the process of that?
That is a great question. So all of the resources have to be vetted a little bit. So that is me on the back end. Anytime I get an email, that's process for submitting resources. Start from the beginning. So you can submit a resource at the bottom of the Clearinghouse screen where I showed the button that says suggest a resource. If you click there, there's a SurveyMonkey that pops up and you can submit a resource through there. You can also email me anytime at annie.carroll, C-A-R-R-O-L-L, at opr.ca.gov. And that email should also be at the end of the presentation. But we also do actively look for resources, but it's always best to get resources that are suggested just because it lets us know what people are really looking for and what resources people on the ground are actually using. So thank you for the question.
All right, and we have another question. Does OPR provide technical assistance to local governments to implement SB 379, or where should they go for that assistance?
That is a great question. We, in our role at OPR, cannot necessarily endorse certain strategies over others to meet SB 379. But there are some really great resources to learn more about how you can implement SB 379. So, for example, the Adaptation Planning Guide is a fantastic place to start, and they're also updating the APG right now. So there will be a new one coming out soon that you can use. And the Clearinghouse is also obviously a great place to look for any sort of resources that you need for any sort of adaptation work. But there is no one-size-fits-all way to meet SB 379, so we sort of shy away from giving one specific, one-size-fits-all strategy for SB 379. But please email us at OPR for any sort of questions that you have, and we will absolutely try to work with you in your jurisdiction. Thanks for the question.
All right, the next question we have is, what is the criteria for a resource?
Great. So criteria for resources are: one, they must be relevant to California, or mention California specifically. Two, they have to be hosted on a separate site, with the exception of case studies. And three, they have to focus on adaptation and resilience to climate change. Although we do favor an integrated approach. So we will accept things that are like climate action plans that might focus mostly on mitigation, but have an adaptation resilience aspect to them or chapter. We'd love those too. So those are sort of the three criteria.
All right, and the next question that I have, Jen, I think that this one might be for you. How are you dealing with the potential scenarios that involve rapid cascading effects of exceeding tipping points? So for example, the IPCC says that there's rapid warming and that we're hitting our tipping points, like the blue Arctic and methane releases, for example. Do you have any comments on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're very early in this overarching process, which is a multi-year effort. So that will definitely be a component of this sort of first phase of our work of generating the latest climate projections and scenarios for California. So we have a team of people we work closely with on that. So that will be considered, of course.
Great, thank you. And if anybody else has any other questions, please go ahead and submit them to Annie or Carol. Annie or Jen. And thank you again so much to Annie and Jen for joining us today, and for everyone who was able to participate in this webinar. We hope that you found it worthwhile and valuable. And as a reminder, the webinar recording and PowerPoint presentations will be shared via email and also posted on the CRC website. And if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And that concludes this webinar. Thank you again for everyone for joining us today.